Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
We are doing our book club.
Yep, and you can listen to this on the road. You can listen to this sitting down, standing up. You can listen to this one in bed.
In bed.
But by the time you're done with this one, you better be out of bed.
What's funny about this journey on this book club is I've literally picked 0 of these books.
Yeah.
And I've kind of gone in blind to almost every single one of them.
Just the way I want it.
So I feel like I'm your test subject a lot of times. Like, you've read this before or you knew about it?
I read every book that we've gone through except for Simply Christian before. So 3 out of 4 so far.
Okay, so you were aware of what you were throwing me into.
Mm-hmm.
I was not. So this is only it's like I always judge things off of time on Audible because I don't read actually the books. I'm listening to them. So you can judge whether or not that's reading.
But instead of, you can tell the way somebody engages with a book. If they say page numbers, it's a physical book.
Yeah.
If they say percentage, I'm 40% through this book.
Yep.
Could be Audible, could be Kindle.
Yeah, but if you say time.
But if you say, yeah, this book's 2 hours long.
Yep.
That's like saying Springfield's 45 minutes away. Mm-hmm. No, it's like 35 miles away.
Yep.
But whatever. Anyway. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the way that I orient around a book. So this is a very dense book, but it's only 2 hours and 15 minutes long. And, give you an idea of read novels that are like 50. So like, as a whole,
page wise, it's like 100 or less.
Yeah. It's like literally, I think like an hour is like 50 pages. So like every 50 pages is like, an hour, depending on how fast you're reading.
Yeah.
And obviously I read this faster than most, but I actually enjoy nonfiction faster. I think my brain, it like tracks and ends up not getting as easily distracted, which is weird to think about. But anyway, this is a book on getting out of bed.
It is.
It'd be weird if you're listening to this while you're laying in bed.
No, but that's what I'm saying. You can listen to this in bed, but by the end of the book, end of the podcast, you better be out of bed.
So I didn't know what this was about. I really thought it was more of like basically like start some habits that would change your life. Like by the title, it was more of like, there's studies that have shown that people that make their bed are like 80% more likely to be a millionaire in their lifetime. There's studies that show like making your bed is like the first discipline thing to like changing your eating habits or changing
like
your
Jordan Peterson.
Yes, but it's also like a mental side of things where you just feel more confident, you're more capable, like your life's in control. And it is about like controlling what you can and like doing what you can. That is not what this book's about.
No.
It's not what it's about at all.
This is honestly a really great and helpful book. This is one of those books that's short, easily accessible because of how short it is. But it's a great tool. This is like one of those books that you could hand out to people on a case-by-case basis. But it's really great because the premise of the book, if you haven't read it, let me back up. If you're listening to this right now and you have read the book, congratulations, we're going to talk about it. If you haven't, this could be us selling you on the book.
Yep.
So it's okay if you haven't read it. Anyway, so the premise of the book is him talking about mental suffering. And he talks about how it could be for any number of reasons. It could be a diagnosed mental disorder, mental health thing, or it could be the kind of mental suffering that normal people go through because there's a lot of suffering in the world.
Yeah.
So it could be circumstantial, or it could be like midlife crisis-esque, where it's like you get into a job, you do a thing, and you just feel a lack of purpose or like questioning or doubting a lot of stuff. All of those things, or if you lose somebody, if you have somebody in your life who you love who's sick, all of those things lead to mental suffering. Some of them, like certain mental health conditions, are hard to explain because it's like it feels hard to justify even for the individual because it's like, no, my whole family's healthy and alive. I have a good job. I have a good family. Why am I anxious and depressed all the time?
I think that's what I loved about the
Yeah.
start of the book was the start of the book. It kind of dissolves all these like parameters around how we perceive suffering, how we talk about it. And he does a really good job of talking about how like a lot of people have techniques to overcome suffering. And like, you just need to learn the next technique. And if you learn the right technique, then everything will be okay. And I loved what he said about like, that is just not helpful for a lot of people that
it's helpful for a minute, for a circumstance,
Yeah, but in the end, it denies that suffering is present. It leaves it up to suffering as something that you've done wrong that has caused this, and if you would just get it right, the suffering would go away.
Yeah, techniques are helpful in alleviating some of the burden of some suffering.
Yeah.
But techniques aren't a cure, and when you walk around and talk as if techniques are the cure, all suffering is a lack of sufficient techniques and energy.
Well, and then he does a really good job of pointing out that like people that are suffering, they end up putting a lot of that like, oh, it's something I've done wrong. And so it's the sin in my life, the brokenness in my life, something that's occurred to me, something that I'm not processing right. And so the techniques end up feeling like they're actually more of a burden because when it doesn't solve it or it doesn't go away completely, then it starts to feel like, see, it's proof of how broken I am and proof of how wrong I am. And he really does a good job of talking about like what techniques ultimately should like have done that shouldn't be is like just admit that suffering is present. Like that's just in the world and that suffering is a normal, expected thing to a level.
Yeah.
And I think that was what I loved about the first half of the book was like, he said the church just does a poor job sometimes of just saying like, you're going to suffer. Like there's no way to not suffer in this world.
It's sort of weird because and I've heard certain people talk about this as the evangelism bait and switch.
Yeah.
Where we definitely try not to do it here, but it just kind of happens because of the way the Bible, the New Testament is written. You want to give all the peaceful, easy Jesus verses up front. Then you get saved, you get baptized, and that's like, welcome to heck. This is so hard. Jesus didn't promise to alleviate your suffering. Meanwhile, when you're trying to sell them on Jesus, you're like, his yoke is easy. His burden is light. Being with Jesus fulfills that hole in your heart. And then you get there and you're like, he's crushing your heart. So it really is like, some of the way that people have tried to sell Christianity, and I don't mean that in a consumeristic, evil way. I mean, people are so enamored with Jesus, they want people to find Jesus. That's good.
Yeah.
And Jesus is a helpful friend through suffering and has the power to step in certain moments.
Absolutely.
And change or end or answer suffering. And he will do that with all suffering. But maybe not in our lifetime, and he talks about that. All suffering is short term.
Oh yeah,
In the Christian worldview, the lack of suffering is the goal. I don't know if I would put it exactly that way, but like Revelation 21, God's coming back and he's going to set all things right, and he's going to answer all suffering. That doesn't mean that if he doesn't answer it now, he never will. But sometimes the suffering seems so real and so terminal. Yeah. I'm always going to be lonely. I'm always going to be sick or hurting or achy. My ears are always going to ring so loud. My whatever.
Yeah.
And if you're a Christian, even though that suffering is loud in your life right now, you have to anchor yourself to the fact that it isn't the end. And even if it lasts your whole life, in terms of eternity, it's short term.
Yeah.
It's a temporary thing.
I think that's why this book, I think, rang true to me in a lot of ways. Because I am somebody that has, I wouldn't call them like necessarily like horrible mental illness struggles in any way, but I have deep emotional, I would say, chasms that I can fall into where I can feel the weight of the world and other people and my own brokenness in a way that it is almost soul crushing. Like the end of the day feels like, goodness gracious, is there any, it feels like Frodo, it's like Sam's trying to like paint him a picture of what is good because all he sees is Mordor and everything that's broken and wrong and dead. And he's like, no. And he's like painting the Shire again. And he's like trying to help him like imagine things are good.
It feels like seasonal depression, but it's like daily depression.
Yeah.
The sun's going down. Oh no. And like all of this like angst and that chasm you're talking about like starts to become more real and more in focus.
And it is like how much you're in, for me, it's how much I'm engrossed in like I've positioned myself through a calling, through a position I work, that most of the time the things that I'm dealing with are pain and suffering of others. And so a lot of the conversations and a lot of the things that I'm doing, I'm intentionally there. And I love that God uses me in that way. I'm not negating that nor pushing that away. It's just sometimes you go, is anyone winning? Like, is anyone actually doing like are we all just losing? And I think this book gently kind of says we're all losing. Like gently is like, like there's nobody in this world that is not suffering. in some way or capacity. And if they're not, it's fleeting, momentary, and it will not last. In fact, he says that in one of the last chapters, that he's like, that joy that you feel sometimes where it just overwhelms and it sneaks in and makes you feel so good.
And suffering feels so distant.
It's the exact same way that suffering is. It sneaks in and all of a sudden it's there and you can't feel joy at all. And he's like,
you can't even remember joy.
You can't even remember joy. And he's like, that's the same. It's the same cycle for a lot of people. The tension that I love that he got to, and I know there's plenty of things we could talk about this book. It's so short that I feel like we're going to, talk about similar things because it really does kind of rotate around this idea of like, there is no technique to completely eliminate suffering in this world. None. Yeah. And so admitting that the tension of suffering is part of the human experience as we know it. Yeah. But he also talks about the tension of what am I incapable of changing versus what is inside my control of working on. And so a person that has depression, admitting to where the feelings and how they're being, basically taken over by depression has a sense of control in their life. But what do they have control of? And
the way he talks about this is through the word agency, which if you're a lawyer or watch a lot of legal shows or philosophy and theology and whatever, they'll talk about agency a lot. One of the hardest parts about being paralyzed by the waist down is a lack of some agency. It's harder to do some things. It doesn't mean you can't do anything, but the higher up you get paralyzed by an accident or something like that, the more agency you're losing. Or like people at the end of their life in nursing homes or whatever. They've lost a lot of agency, even though for a lot of them, they have the mental, like the bank of wisdom to be able to lead a really full life, but their body's crumbling from underneath them. Yeah. And so like they need assisted living or they need like a full nursing home because even though they're a full adult person, they're losing agency at the end of their life. Yeah. So he talks about agency against mental suffering, to fight back against mental suffering. And he talks about it in two ways. One is how blurry the line is between how much agency you have to fight your mental suffering and how much it's like handcuffing or handicapping you. Yeah. So he's like, no, even with all the mental health sciences we have today, all the counseling techniques, all the psychiatry and psychology, nobody can paint a solid line for any other person where their mental suffering and their mental health issue is in control and what they have to control. Yeah. Just the same thing for addicts of any sort of substance. Yep. It's impossible to draw a straight, clear line between how much is the alcohol or the substance controlling you and how much can you fight back against it. Yep. And he said because of that, even people on your side can get sort of tired of your fight because they assume a solid line is further up. You have more fight to give. Or they assume that it's further back. You can't do anything and you whatever. And so his point in all that is not to say there is a solid line and it's right here and you need to do this. But his point is to say like, or at least have an inkling where you are in proximity to that line. You may not be able to say, I can always fight up to this one line, but you can say, I have a little more fight to give. I can muster up a little more strength for the benefit of my neighbors and my children and whatever. So he talks about it from that side, and there's another side that he talks about it from, and I don't remember my second point.
A lot of it was dealing with that with community. So he was talking about like inviting other people. Like when you can't walk, it's okay to let somebody else carry you. Yeah. And I think that was a huge, so, we all have people in our lives that maybe have some struggles in this or like have a propensity to go towards like these types of issues. But I think there's like a level of like, I loved how he talked about it. It's like, it's almost like it's mundane where it's like, we're just doing the same thing. And it's like drudgery. We're like, gosh, they're struggling with this again, and it's like, goodness, are they ever going to get over this? And are they ever going to get past this? And I think what he was trying to say is like, you have that own struggle inside your head in the first half, but like, you're almost like frustrated with yourself to a level of like, why can't I just figure this out? Why can't I just solve this problem? Why can't I find the right technique? Why won't it just go away? And I think the thing that he was trying to say, especially in the first half, was like, it's not going to go away. It's a tension you're always going to have.
Yep.
And you're always going to have to fight to do the next right thing. You're always going to have to fight to just get out of bed. And the motivation to get out of bed was the thing that I was not expecting. So like the exact opposite thing that what I was thought the book was going to be about was like, get out of bed because you can get better, do better, be better. It was like, no, you need to get out of bed because your friends need you.
Yeah. So there's
people need you. Like,
there's two books that this book heavily relies on. One, he references a ton, called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Trevor, you were telling me a little bit about that earlier. How it was
I love The Road. So here's the thing. I think it's a polarizing book. It's a very, very, I think it won a Pulitzer Prize. Like I'm not sure that, but I'm pretty sure it's like a very, very like, it is an intense dystopian, almost like parable or like,
Parable feels right.
it is like it's incredibly symbolic. I should say that it's a dystopian symbolic narrative that's a fictional story made up of just a man and a boy
And his wife. The man's wife.
So if you haven't read it, the wife's not in the book, but it's in flashbacks.
Oh yeah.
So it's wild. So it's just a man and a boy, and they're on the road, and they're talking about where they've come from. And they're talking about where they're trying to go, but no character's ever named. And there's constantly threats of like cannibals and all this other stuff.
You were telling me it was like a nuclear apocalypse thing, and there's a scarcity of food, especially meat.
And there's this rumor that if you can get to this far off place, that everything's going to be better and that it's going to be okay. But everything along the book just tells you that it's probably not true. It's just like a wishful thinking.
Yeah.
And so, of course, things happen along the way, and the main character, the man, you can tell is really sick, and he's not doing well. And he's the only one to take care of this boy. And so it's this wild just narrative of as they go through the story. And I'm not trying to ruin it. You really should go and read it. But I think why he references it is because this man is not getting up and doing everything every morning and taking care of himself. He's purely doing it off the motivation to take care of the boy. Like he's like, I just have to take care. I have to get him to the place.
Yeah.
And his suffering, just though it's there and he references it, though he mentions it, though he takes care of himself to the best he can, he ultimately doesn't let it distract him from his purpose of like what he's called to do in the book. And so I think that's why in this it's referenced so much, is because I think what he's basically trying to say is if you can picture yourself and your suffering as an obstacle to overcome, to commit yourself to the purposes that are right in front of you in your life, suffering no longer becomes something to dwell on. It becomes something to admit and to work through, but not to distract or completely eliminate your ability to keep going towards the thing that you've been called to.
Suffering is a really loud worldview agent.
Yeah.
It's going to tell you that, and the more mental health issues you throw at it, the more difficult it becomes. But it's going to speak all day very loudly and convince you that you're alone and nobody wants to help you, that when people do help you, you're a burden on them, and that everything's worse than it is. And it's going to trick you into thinking you have less agency than you do. You have less fight to fight. You have less energy to like make the world a better place and serve and love your neighbor and whatever. And it's real.
Oh yeah.
It's a real force, but at the same time, it's also a propaganda machine. I'm going way further than what he says and what I'm saying right now, but this is my summary of what he's saying. And so like there is real force to fight against in suffering, but the propaganda suffering is spewing is that you have no agency.
Yeah.
You have no hope. You have no whatever. But so it leans on that book, The Road, which Trevor was telling me is like possibly the basis for The Last of Us.
Yeah, it definitely has some foundational things that are going on, because and the thing about The Road that is really intense, because when you read the book, what the book does for you is it constantly removes the feeling of hope. It just slowly shreds it through the whole book. And so at the beginning, you hear about the place far off, and as you're going through the book, it's like things are happening where like they're stuck somewhere. Things, they run out, they lose something, or like all these things that are happening that you're just like,
Yeah.
surely nothing else horrible can happen before, it's like, and, and then you're hearing the main character have to kind of overcome it and talk himself into keeping going.
Yeah.
And it's the reason why I'm sure he references it so much is because there's that character itself is that symbolic. Like,
so he leans on that book a lot. The other book he leans on is a book that the author has written before called You Are Not Your Own. And it's a book trying to convince people that the world is trying to convince you, and America and the Western world is trying to convince you you're an individual, you're a consumer. You're here to consume for your own pleasure and entertainment, and you're here to get what you can out of other people. And he pretty much writes this book, You Are Not Your Own, to say, no, you belong to other people.
Yeah.
You can't make all these decisions on your own and live a happy, flourishing life. You belong to other people necessarily, and not a curated group of other people. You can think you belong. If you're a pastor, you think you belong to your church. If you're a baseball player, you think you belong to your team or whatever until they trade you. But really, you belong to a large group of people, children and elderly and sick and healthy and men and women, and they all look up to you to see your character. They all look up to you to see how you live your life. Because you're an example for other people. And they all look to you when they're in need, and you look to them when you're in need. Yeah. And so you necessarily belong to other people. That's one of the motivations that he talks about in the book. You were telling me you were sort of surprised by where some of the philosophical discussions go, because of his real engagement with suffering, both individually and in people he loves and knows. And he talks about self-harm a little bit, but then suicide a good amount. And why do you get out of bed, but why do you keep living when you know you're going to die? Why do you keep living when you know you'll never be able to eliminate suffering on your own in this life?
Well, and he talks about like when you get to a point where you realize you have nothing else to offer to society, that society will have to take care of you, and that you really can't help society get better or really offer anything to society of value. Like the natural conclusion of that is like, okay, I should just be done. Like I should go away, like because I'm going to drain resources and I cannot give. So,
and I feel like we hear that a lot in this area. Farmers and older guys being like, "When I can't be able to farm anymore, just sit me out under a tree and leave me to die."
Yep.
And we say that with a little smirk on our face, but he has so much to say about that.
Well, and I think that's the scary thing is like there are a bunch of people that don't feel like they've ever contributed. And so they're already stuck in that route, and they're not 60 or 70 years old, like looking back. They're like in their 20s going like, I don't feel like I'll ever be able to offer the world anything worth. And so,
and then the other side, which is I've always contributed. Am I worth anything? Do I matter if I don't contribute anymore?
Absolutely. That's one of Henry Nouwen's favorite, one of his books, but it's The Beloved. He talks about working with mentally handicapped people in, and those that are just, needing basically 100% care at a facility in Canada. And he was just talking about how, like, why did this facility exist? Because none of these people would be able to add anything of any value to the nation, or they're not going to invent anything. They're not going to produce any food. They're not going to build a house. They're not going to build any kind of transportation or clothing. They're not going to be able to do any of that. So like, and he just talked about how, but the more you interact with them, the more you realize they're precious. They're just precious people. And it has nothing to do with what they can provide.
Yeah.
And I feel like this book at the end is definitely leaning, I mean, multiple times through, but it is leaning into this idea of like inherent value.
Yeah.
Like you have inherent value, which means others have inherent value.
Yeah. And that was one of my favorite proofs that he gave. And it's not a proof like here's the data or here's science or whatever. But he said, when you look at somebody in your family or somebody who you deeply love, usually you look at them and you love them not because of what they can give you. You just love them because you love them and you see all this worth in them. But you never do that to yourself. But you have to know that when you do that, you're doing it because you're a person. That's what people do. So they do that to you.
Yep.
They see you and see inherent worth, even though your loud propaganda machine of suffering, mental suffering in your life says, no, that's not true. Nobody sees that, whatever. This is something I wish every like high schooler, middle schooler would hear, that in the age of like TikTok and Instagram and whatever, you need to curate your individualistic life and come up with enough aura, enough worth points to be
enough
worth
good vibes.
Yeah, and to be worth keeping around, to be worth like living and befriending and whatever. Like, no, you are actually special and lovely and like precious because you're a person.
Yep.
Not because you're a person who does enough or is enough, but you are. And that's his thing about the Father and the Son in the road is like the Son isn't doing much, if anything, to provide and contribute.
No, he's
especially not
going
compared
to
the
die.
Father.
He's going to die if the Father can't take care of him.
Yeah,
like he's not going to be able to make it.
So why does the Father take care of him? Because he's precious.
Yep,
to him.
It is just a beautiful, I think, perspective of like if you cared for yourself as much as this man is caring for his child, you wouldn't do what you're doing. You wouldn't say what you're saying. You wouldn't think what you're thinking. And like, I think the amount of like the suffering does not take away from the value.
Yeah.
The cost of this life does not take away from the inherentness of your value, your worth, what you're working. And I think that's why when it got to the second half of the book, which I think was actually the more intense like thing that I was not prepared for, was actually the like. And he says this, like, you know, to the level that we can know what mental illness is. So, like, actually diagnose whether it's, you know, split personality, bipolar, you know, some sort of schizophrenic thing, or just depression that's beyond, like, normal, you know, and, like, chemical, hormonal, whatever you want to call it.
It doesn't matter if it's manic depressive or if it's, like, general
Yeah, and he just does
like,
such a good job of just talking about, like, there are people that may be a lifelong struggle. And like he just admits in a way that I don't know if I've heard, you know, it's scary as an author to say that because I think, how does that sell? Like, how does that book sell? When you're like, nope, you may stay like this forever. And like every pill and every counselor and every good technique to try to eliminate this probably will never. And so what do we do with that? And I love your paralysis thing. It is like if this is just how my brain is in paralysis, if this is how my feelings are in paralysis and I can't change them, like how am I going to be operating? Like how, like, and I love what he said. It's like in that line that you're describing in that clinical side of things, it's like how much of this am I like causing on myself because I'm not making the right choices?
Yeah.
Or
because I don't have good enough techniques.
Exactly. Versus how much do I just need the grace of God to like come in and rescue me from myself because it's broken.
That's John Coward hit me up with a great quote recently from Charles Spurgeon where he said, Charles Spurgeon, famous Christian in semi-recent history, hundreds of years ago, but not thousands.
Yeah.
But he famously struggled with depression his whole life as like a preacher, evangelist, like a guy people leaned on. He famously struggled with depression. And he said, Christ came to save us from our sin, not from our suffering.
Yeah. And I think the suffering servant, why Jesus had to suffer is because he needed to know the human experience. I also think that he did a good job, the author in this book did a good job of talking about like the suffering that we're experiencing is proof of the need for a savior. Like there's not like a way that we can save ourselves in our suffering. You know?
He said a line in there, all of our suffering is unique, but it isn't special.
Yep.
So we are suffering, and we're suffering in a way that's maybe a specific blend of different elements of suffering that nobody else has. But our suffering isn't special, meaning everybody else is suffering to their own degree in their own way. Everybody struggles with suffering. And so we can't, when we realize that, we can give ourselves a lot more grace. Social media makes us triple hard.
Yeah.
Where we see everybody at their best. Occasionally on Facebook, for me, I'll see people who post a whole long like, hey, this is going on. I'm feeling really bad today or whatever. And that's sort of a new phenomenon. But for most people, I don't know about most people. For the majority of posts I see, it's hanging out at this party, doing this thing with these cool people on this cool vacation. And they post about the good things, the joyful
or what
things.
they're learning or what they're doing or what they're changing or what they're working
experiences, milestones. They're not posting about like, I was sad today.
Yeah.
And not with a picture and not in a bright, flashy way.
Well,
and so we get tricked into thinking everybody else is doing okay. I'm the only one who's suffering daily like this.
And I think that's why that Craig Rochelle quote that I've said for probably a decade now is like, you impress with strengths, but you relate through weakness. And maybe you relate even through suffering. I think that's the point of that quote, is like the moments that you feel least adequate, most broken, most distant, most frustrated, least equipped. Actually, more people feel that way than any other way, And so when you start, and I mean, it really is true. Like when you make fun of yourself and self-deprecation, and like you kind of poke fun at yourself, and not like a like insecure way, but like a fun, playful way, it is amazing how quickly that can bring the defenses down of other people, because they start to realize like, hey, we're not putting on a facade here. We're like, I'm fully aware that like I'm not. Like I'm an idiot. Like I'm not perfect. And I think suffering becomes something though of, and you'll feel this in the church world, of a proof of faith. And that's what he talked a lot about. And he's like, if you are suffering too much, then man, your faith's just not strong enough. And you must just have like messed up somewhere. and like it is like this weird dilemma / like kind of thing that's been put out there. And I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I would say suffering is proof of faith in so many aspects, because you're going against the tide of what is natural, and you're actually pushing back.
He had so many great stories. I don't know if it was just stories exactly, because he didn't name the person. Treated it like the road, like an allegory or whatever. Yeah. But so many great literary descriptions of somebody pushing through suffering to do stuff. He had 2 or 3, like a parent in a house with little kids, and they're going through panic attacks or whatever. Yep. And if the kids are being like, they try to hide in a bathroom or in their room, and the kids knock on the door and ask for water like immediately. And he had one about taking your kids to the pool and holding your youngest daughter's hand, even though you feel like death and you don't want to be there. And not just in a bored way or a not fun way for you, but like, your brain is screaming the whole time and I need to go to a quiet place, whatever. Yep. But you're fighting through it to love your kids and to be there. It's more about being present than it is about being the exact right blend of happy-go-lucky, whatever. And again, going back to you are not your own, blending all this to say like, your own line. You know that when you can and cannot fight against suffering. And on top of that, it's good that you take the time to get the help you need, go through counseling, take time off, take a walk, and let friends talk to you. I really love this line in the book. It's not anti-counseling or anti-psychiatry or anything like that. But he said a lot of the normal checkup kind of mental health help that people need is stuff that used to be fulfilled by a wise parent, a wise conversation with a friend, and now is a boss, school counselor, actual normal out in the world therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, and like just having good, loving relationships where you can talk to each other and be weak with each other and let each other help you are so good. And this is especially true when it comes to you needing help. He said, you're not, even if they don't express it, even if they say the opposite, you're not a burden on people who really love you when you need extra help and you need to talk more. Maybe they're busy and they can't talk, but it's such a blessing for people to be able to sacrificially help other people when they're in need. Don't rob other people of that opportunity.
And he has that story in there where his friend was like, he needed help and he called a friend and he felt like he, for a season,
it's like weeks on end,
calling him every day to check in. And he finally started like feeling guilty about it. And he said he apologized to his friend for being so needy. And his friend was like angry with him and said, what are you talking about? Like, I signed up for this when I decided to be your friend. Don't rob me of the opportunity to be your friend. Like, I want to be your friend. This is what friendship costs. And I am your friend. And
so the call is be that friend for other people. And you have to know your own line between your own suffering and what you're able to do. Be that friend even when you don't feel perfect and great, even when it's not convenient.
Yes.
When you can.
And I think the beauty of this, and to conclude, because it's only a 2-hour book, so it's really something I'm like, go read it. Like, like I put it on times 2, it was an hour and 15 minutes. Like, it didn't take
That's going to be like 2 of these podcasts.
It really was legitimately that fast. And it was really, really good.
So good.
The thing about that I love, that is a thing that I'm taking away from the book, is the concept of like, we think that our stress and our suffering and our pain is limiting our ability to live a full life and to walk out with our friends. And the painful, difficult answer to hear is, you're right. Yeah. It is. But the truth of the matter is, that's also where grace has to come in and meet you there. That's where grace comes in and says, I know, it's okay. He has a beautiful story to end the book. I don't know if you remember it, but he talks about one morning on a Saturday, he couldn't get out of bed, and he had been lying in bed for 2 hours and just could not find the will to get out of bed. And he said his small daughter knocked on the door and came in with a small note. And she handed it to him while he was still lying in bed. And it just said, Daddy, I hope you feel better today. And he said, and my daughter carried me out of bed that day, because I got up and I went downstairs and she carried me the whole way. And in my mind, that is what we're called to do, is to be gentle and loving and kind to people in their suffering, but we're also called to receive it and to position ourselves where God can do that or others can do that for us. Suffering is not a sign of weakness, nor a sign of brokenness that you are beyond repair. Like you said, we are
not a sign of abnormal brokenness.
No, we are all uniquely broken, but we are all broken. Yeah. And so it is a weird way of just saying like your suffering is normal. It's not something beyond God's care, nor the care of others. And it's also something you're called to share in the suffering of others with them. And to trust God and to trust others to help you. And it's such a good book of just basically saying you're seen and known while you're hurting, and it's okay. And
it's okay that you're hurting.
It's okay. And like, I love that there's no like bow on top.
Yeah.
Like there's no like wrap up.
It reminds me
okay. Like,
of, it reminds me of, I'm a big fan of the Holy Post. I listen to their podcast all the time. And I'm on episode 666.
Jeez.
And they have a guy on to talk about a podcast about the satanic panic of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and Dungeons and Dragons is demonic and whatever.
Harry Potter.
And rock music is demonic. And the guy who like made this podcast and did all the research and interviews and whatever, he's like, I feel like Occam's razor would have solved a lot of this. This Occam's razor being the simplest answer is usually the right answer.
Yeah.
He said they were looking for the demonic and satanic. When you play some of these records backwards, the satanic was on the front of the album cover with all the stars and horns and whatever. It's because the artists like that grotesque imagery.
Yep.
What you didn't have to dig.
Yeah.
It was right there.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the extent of it for a lot of the rock music. But they were so convinced that there's a subliminal messaging and it's secret in there. No, it's on the cover. So I say all that to say the same thing here. We're so convinced that our suffering is only our own and that we're a burden to all the people around us, and it's not okay that we're suffering. It would be so much harder for us to be unique than for us to be normal.
Yeah.
It would be so much more statistically an anomaly for us to be the only one suffering. Actually, the simplest answer is everybody's suffering.
Yep.
You just don't know how.
And I think if you are somebody that maybe has somebody that has like a large amount of suffering that you don't understand, and that you're trying to get inside the mind of a person that maybe has had some either clinical or just seasonal stuff that you're like, man, I don't
tragedy
get it. Yes. And, or if you yourself recently or in your past, or you perceive maybe this being a repeated thing that you're going to struggle with, man, this is a helpful thing that I feel like you could read and really give you. It's not strategy. That's the beautiful thing. It's understanding.
It's not technique.
It's not technique, right?
The only technique in there is, it's not David Goggins. It's not who's going to carry the boats and logs of your heart or whatever. But it is a little bit of like the only technique is, like worldview, perspective sort of stuff. And then like do your best within your ability to be healthy and get the help you need. And don't be afraid to do that. And do your best within your ability with your own suffering to be there for your friends and family and people who care about you.
It's very much so 2 Corinthians 12. It's just the thorn in your flesh. My grace is sufficient. Like, keep doing the mission, keep doing the work, keep moving forward. And that's why the title is On Getting Out of Bed. It's just keep doing
it, even if you don't feel like it's true or feel like it's working or feel like you can do it.
And he ends the book by saying that, like, get out of bed, get dressed, make breakfast, go to work, and believe that in your suffering, that is grace-filled living.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, yep, to write a book on that simplistic of a thing, but has that deep of an impact, shows a need.
Yep.
And so really appreciate you bringing this book up. I hope that if any of you read it or are looking into it, let us know what you thought, if we missed anything or if there's anything that we needed to talk about, or if you're like, I'd love to, talk to you more about it, contact us. We'd love to sit down or have a conversation.
I do want to just warn you at the very end of this. If you want to share this book with somebody else, if you want to read it yourself and you think it would be even marginally dangerous to mention suicide or triggering or whatever, I would read it yourself if you're the person who won't be triggered by it. Yeah. That's just a warning that he does talk about it. And he talks about it kind of a lot for how short of a book it is.
He does mention it, but I also think it's done in a very...
Yes, it's done in a healthy way.
It's done in a healthy way, but I could see somebody, if they're not in a good spot, you want to make sure that you're doing this at least in the context of knowing what you're presenting, because it does have that.
Yep. And my favorite thing is he presents it well and he talks about it well, but he also talks about it in a believable way. Yep. If you're somebody who's thought about suicide or contemplated suicide, you'll find the way he talks about it familiar and honest and not like
and hopeful,
demonizing or anything. Anyway, so just wanted to say that. Last thing, our next
book. What are we doing?
Our next book that we're going to do, it just came out. I have not read it. So this is adding on the other side of the scoreboard for books I haven't read. It is called The Familiar Stranger by Tyler Staton. Subtitle, Reintroducing the Holy Spirit to Those in Search of an Experiential Spirituality. I like doing this right now because if you read this book this month and if you come to our church, you'll hear a lot of the same stuff. We're talking about evangelism. We're talking about the book of Acts.
Yep.
All kind of has to do with the Holy Spirit. So.
Pentecost and all that stuff too, which is cool. Which is all this to be said. Thanks so much for listening. If you've listened this far, as always, share if you feel like it. Leave us a review. It helps.
Yeah.
And Will, we appreciate you.
This is for you, Will.
As always, hopefully you'll tune back in. You can check out any number of our other podcasts. If you found this one interesting, you can go back and listen to the other books that we've already read this year. And as Ryan said, The Familiar Stranger will be the next one. But until we see you guys again, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. See you later.
See ya.